Well, good almost afternoon. My name is Enrique, also known as the last man before lunch. By the end of this 5 minutes, some of you will probably take to calling me Cassandra, which I also go by. I teach communications and constitutional law at Elon in North Carolina. My 3-year-old daughter is getting stitches in North Carolina for the first time as we speak, so I'll try to get through this, disprove the implication we just heard that lawyers aren't humans. So I'll try to work on that. My research focuses on digital speech and international freedom of expression. And this project involves trying to figure out what's different about digital speech and whether those differences should shape how we think about it and regulate it and protect it. This is the simplest possible model of how the United States First Amendment analyzes communication among citizens. The speaker is the S, the speech is the arrows, and the L's are listeners. The model relies on a presumption that the speakers and the listeners share the same physical space. Geography limits speech. Listeners generally have to be in the same place at the same time in order to receive the message. Spatial and temporal limitations. When there's an alleged government interference with this type of speech, the First Amendment looks at the space the speaker and the listener share. Questions like who owns it, whether it's traditionally been used for speech, to determine the degree to which the government can interfere with it. If it's a public space but not a traditional speech space, like the park, the government can shut it down ex ante, before speech is spoken, without offending the First Amendment. This is a very basic description of our public forum doctrine. It comes from the principle of easement in property law. An easement is the right to use someone else's property for historical use based on that prior use. Because citizens are in a speech easement over government property, the government can exclude speakers from that speech. Think about Speaker's Corner on Hyde Park. This, however, models citizen-to-citizen communication through ICT. The speaker and the listeners don't share physical space. Speech is sent and received from different locations. Listeners don't have to share space, and space remains received for so long as the listener chooses to keep it. Speech can also be repeated by a listener without any degradation of the message. But this model also demonstrates something else. The degree to which intermediation affects every speech act over ICT. Every point in the act of communication, the speaking, the listening, the repeating, is facilitated by a third party. The intermediary can be a network operator, such as government in the case of a municipal Wi-Fi network. In the case of the speech arrows, it can be a software provider, Twitter, Facebook, BlackBerry Messenger. In the access to information context, the speaker can be the government, and the listeners can be citizens accessing government information. To use Chris's term from yesterday, I think this diagram perfectly illustrates government as platform. Intermediation is still required. What does that mean? We've overcome temporal and spatial limitation on speech, but we need intermediation in order to do so. What's the consequence of intermediation? We have exponentially increased the capacity for interference with speech, whether it be by a private party or by the state. Without a shared speech space, no speech easement is earned. So my question is digital speech and other information more accessible but less free? One sub-question is the role of the policies of private companies in deciding how ICT is used for speech. In the States, this is the terms of service of speech rules debate. Google and Twitter exercising their policies in a way that arguably interferes with speech. Also the debates we have here in the States over net neutrality. How has this intermediation manifested itself? In a range of ways, both technological and non-technological in nature. We've always had interferences with speech ex post, that's punishing speech via criminal law or civil liability. But what ICT has done is two things. One, expanded the array of ways in which a government or a private actor can interfere with speech ex ante, before it's spoken. And two, it's made many ex post interferences with speech far more effective. Control over communications infrastructure is interference with speech. I'll talk about that more in a second. This is another illustration of a rosaceous theme from yesterday. ICT enables centralization, government centralization over information, speech, and data. Not just decentralization. It's dangerous to think about this as just a one-way ratchet. Here's an example that those of you who are local are familiar with of a government exercising control over communications infrastructure that constituted an ex-ante speech interference. In August 2011, a protest was planned on the BART. BART, in response, decided to shut down its cell phone repeaters that let riders access their cell phones on the trains. What was BART's defense? Think about the first model. They said that the train platform was not a traditional speech space. Under current law, that argument is probably correct. So the question we ask ourselves is, should that be correct? Is this a proper analysis for ICT-enabled speech? This problem is going to arise in a variety of contexts. Municipal Wi-Fi networks, which I talked about earlier. New York City has placed free Wi-Fi in 12,000 phone booths. Cell service on public transportation, like I said earlier. Living innovation zones that Shannon talked about yesterday. In some of these cases, the government entity is the network operator. In others, we're talking about public-private partnerships between municipalities and private companies. But the question is, what ramifications does this have for free speech? I have some possible solutions. We can talk about those later. But my guiding principle for this project is that we've achieved a network speech space, but the question I want to answer is whether or not this transition has come at a cost, and if so, what should we do about it?